All right, up next is Edna St. Vincent Millay. She's a very famous poet, and we actually read three of her poems for class. They're not too long, so don't stress. The first one is First Fig. Then we also read Childhood is the Kingdom Where Nobody Dies, and also Apostrophe to Men, or to Man, rather. And as you recall, Edna St. Vincent Millay was one of those people who wrote for Provincetown Playhouse that Susan Glass-Bell and her husband and friends started. So that's kind of a neat connection there. All right, well, if you look in the written out lecture, you'll see a picture of Edna St. Vincent Millay. She's got that short bob hairstyle, remember that we talked about, that became so popular during the 1920s. She's wearing a blazer also, so she looks very businessy. Um, has like a button-down shirt. I can't tell if she's wearing a tie or not. But anyway, she looks very businessy. It's kind of like that look that became popular with women going to work during World War I and perhaps even afterwards, where the mode of dress changed drastically. All right, so explore the following websites if you like, if you have time, and if you want to. There's extensive biographical and literary information on the poets.org. There's the YouTube video that features pictures of Millay and her home set against Millay actually reading one of her poems. Then there is a YouTube video that is a literal dramatization of one of the poems that we read, First Fig. So you hear it and see the visual imagery too. But again, read it first, then watch it. There's another YouTube video that features Edna St. Vincent Millay reading Childhood is the Kingdom Where Nobody Dies, which is another one we read for class. So again, it's really fun to hear these poems read aloud because poetry is meant to be heard and listened to as well as read. I think you get a lot out of both delivery media. This YouTube video, also the last one I posted, it discusses the life and works of Edna St. Vincent Millay as the honoree of a literary festival in her hometown of Newportville. So that's a little fun. Edna St. Vincent Millay, she's an American who lived from 1892 till 1950. She lived till 58 years of age. She was born in Rockland, Maine, and given the name St. Vincent as a middle name in honor of the hospital where her uncle's life had been saved before her birth. So that's where that Edna St. Vincent Millay comes from. Growing up, Millay was called Vincent from her middle name, although reputedly her school principal refused to call a girl by such a brazenly unconventional male name. Thus began a history of bucking tradition and ignoring social convention. For Millay at least. In fact, the anthology calls Millay the very embodiment of the roaring 20s jazz age, when young women hiked up their skirts, bobbed their hair, and stayed out by themselves and imbibed liquor. As non-traditional as Millay was, however, her poems are known nowadays for their traditional modes and meter. So she, used traditional modes and meter, the poetic conventions, which are especially evident in First Fig, which she wrote in 1920. However, Apostrophe to Man, written in 1934, seems almost modernist in its T.S. Eliotesque, that's an adjectival form of the author and poet T.S. Eliot, in the T.S. Eliotesque sense of alienation and comma-induced fragmentation that grow with each alliteration. This poem's lack of rhyme and metered foot also departs from traditional form, perhaps to echo the world's departure from traditional sense and humanity during this time. A noted editor even called Childhood is the Kingdom Where Nobody Dies a 21st century poem, so clearly ahead of its time in form, thought, and subject matter. So both of them are definitely ahead of its time. Apostrophe to Man is between those two world wars where the world was considering to go to war again, or considering going to war again. And I wrote that poem thinking, are you all crazy? Writing basically, oh, all right, go destroy yourselves. Yeah, do it all over again. Obviously you didn't learn from the first time around. And Kingdom Where Nobody Dies is also, or Childhood is the Kingdom Where Nobody Dies is also brooding on the subject matter of death, and what it's like and what people are like when they've experienced it. All right, Millay became a poetic superstar from a very young age. Her father left the family when she was only 8 years old. A woman of great strength and internal commitment, Millay's mother worked as a nurse to raise the children herself, although the family ultimately quartered themselves in a house on an affluent aunt's property. Millay's mother read her children Shakespeare, John Donne, and other literary classics. Reputedly, she taught Edna St. Vincent Millay to compose verse when she was as young as 4 years old only. So that's kind of neat. Wow, what an education. By the age of 15, Millay had published numerous poems in school newspapers and even children's magazines. At 20, Millay won a prestigious poetry contest for her poem Renaissance. Subsequent publicity led to a full scholarship at Vassar College. So that's really exciting. There, Millay acted and wrote plays and poems. When she graduated, Millay moved to Greenwich Village in New York City and began her famously bohemian lifestyle. You know, Greenwich Village is very much known for that bohemian lifestyle, right? Remember the radical Provincetown players that Susan Glaspell and other famous literati started and that performed and made famous such playwrights as Glaspell and Eugene O'Neill in Greenwich Village, right? And Edna St. Vincent Millay also wrote for them. At only 31, Millay won the 1923 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry for The Ballad of the Harp Weaver. Like Catherine Ann Porter, Millay too became caught up in the Illuminati's protest of the xenophobic Sacco and Vanzetti case. Remember, Catherine Ann Porter wrote on that much later in life. But Millay, it was quite an issue at the time. A lot of writers were up in arms about it and wrote about it and embodied it in plots to things that they would write to. Although Millay continued to write verse drama and poetry that made powerful political statements like Apostrophe to Man and Childhood is the Kingdom Where Nobody Dies, her poetry became less popular in the 1930s and 1940s. After a string of love affairs, heterosexual and homosexual, Millay finally settled down with a man who supported Millay in her poetry writing. Her husband took care of domestic life while Millay wrote. However, in 1944, Millay had a nervous breakdown. Her husband, with whom she had a sexually open marriage, cared for her till his death from cancer in 1949. Millay died suddenly and mysteriously the very next year. So that ended her life that way. But I invite you to read these, really compelling and very interesting poems of hers that she wrote that we're reading this week. First Fig, Apostrophe to Man, and Childhood is the Kingdom Where Nobody Dies. Also enjoy reading more about Edna St. Vincent Millay's life. All right, thanks. I turn you over to her.